Until recently, landlords in historic towns and cities such as Bath were largely considered exempt from rules regarding energy performance certificates. Now, if you're not familiar with these are energy assessments that are a legal requirement for properties being marketed for rental or sale. They detail how energy efficient the property is and how potentially efficient it could be if certain improvements were made to the property. Now, until recently, landlords of listed properties were considered exempt from having an EPC when marketing their property. Now, however, that is unfortunately no longer the case, and with the majority of properties in Bath being listed, this is creating something of a new headache for landlords of these properties in some instances. In 2018, the government introduced the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards legislation. This required all properties to be banded Grade E or higher for the property to be able to go on the rental market. Now, properties are banded from A to G in terms of their energy efficiency, so it's just the bottom two bands which were considered too inefficient to be occupied. Landlords of properties with a band F or G rating were obliged to carry out certain improvements until the property achieved that band E or higher, at which point the property could be rented. Now that listed buildings are included within this legislation, it of course throws up a lot of issues for landlords of these properties. However, there are some important things to know if you fall into this bracket. If you have an EPC carried out for your property, if it's a listed building and it comes back band F or G, it doesn't necessarily mean that you had to spend thousands and thousands of pounds to improve the energy efficiency of your property. Some landlords may even be thinking, well, with the restrictions of what I can do to my listed property, it will be impossible for me to reach a band E. Therefore, can I even rent out my property at all? Well, the answer is yes. There are still certain exemptions to the EPC rules. You still have to have the certificate, but if you're a band F or G, you can apply for an exemption under one of the following criteria. First of all, if you have carried out all of the improvements that are recommended on your EPC and your band is still an F or a G, you can apply for an exemption. You don't have to continue doing improvements to the property. There's also an expenditure limit of £3,500. If the recommended works to your property exceed £3,500, you don't have to carry them out. You can apply for an exemption. Equally, if you carry out some improvements, you haven't managed to increase your rating beyond that band E, but the further works would take you above the £3,500, you can stop and apply for the exemption. If you're going down that route, you have to supply 3 quotes to show that the works required would cost more than £3,500. Once you've got that, you can apply for the exemption and you can rent the property out. There are a couple of other ways in which you can apply for an exemption. If the works required would decrease the value of the property by more than 5%, then you don't have to carry out the works. And lastly, and again this may apply to landlords in Bath and other historic cities, if you require third-party consent to carry out the recommended works and you can't obtain that consent, so that might include planning permission or permission from the local authority to carry out works to a listed building. If you can't obtain that, then again, you apply for an exemption. Unfortunately, these certificates are very rarely looked at by prospective tenants. They're not a significant document in terms of the marketing of the property. Some tenants do take heed of them, and that's a good thing. Improving energy efficiency across buildings is to be encouraged. However, the majority of tenants don't look at them. Regardless of that, it is imperative that all landlords have one of these documents, even if your building is listed. But if your rating is low, don't panic. There are ways in which we can help to minimize your expenditure and still rent out your property.